Hey, everybody, and welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're taking a look at the Russian language,
Ooh,
which is spoken by a massive 265 million people all over the world.
that's right. And I think a lot of people don't realize it's actually the eighth most spoken language globally.
Yeah, and I feel like it kind of flies under the radar, especially for English speakers.
Yeah, I agree.
So for this deep dive, we've got a super cool article from Lingualid,
Okay.
and it goes into all sorts of interesting facts about the language.
I'm excited to jump in. What's really interesting to me is how closely tied the history of Russian is to political power,
Mm.
like going all the way back to the Grand Duchy of Moscow.
Oh, so that's why it's still so prevalent even today, like
Oh,
in so many of the former Soviet republic.
exactly. It was basically the language of those places,
Yeah.
especially for education and government.
That's fascinating.
Such a long time.
Yeah, it really shows how languages can be powerful tools
It's true.
for shaping societies and cultures. Absolutely. And this article brings up how the 20th century was really chaotic for the language, with both world wars and then the Cold War.
Oh, yeah. That reminds me of that crazy story about the 1918 Russian orthographic reform.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine the Bolsheviks literally simplifying the writing system
Wow.
and even removing letters to make it easier to learn and print?
Yeah, that's why.
It would be total chaos if that happened to English today.
I know. It's a good example of how language can be a battleground for ideology and tradition.
Right. Like, who even gets to decide what's correct when it comes to language?
It's a really good point. And
Yeah.
the article mentions that some people saw it as a positive step towards modernizing the language,
I can see that.
but others saw it as like an attack on their heritage.
Yeah. Like some emigre groups.
Yeah, exactly.
It really shows how much emotional weight language carries.
It does.
Even if changes are intended for the best, they can still be met with resistance.
Yeah, it's a reminder that language is always evolving,
Yeah.
and it often reflects the social and political climate.
So speaking of the written form of Russian,
Sure.
let's talk about the Cyrillic alphabet.
Okay.
I have to be honest, as someone who only knows the Latin alphabet, it's kind of intimidating.
Yeah, those 33 letters
Yeah.
with their roots in Greek and even some Latin influence.
It's a secret code.
Yeah. But once you crack that code, think of all the possibilities.
Oh my gosh, yeah. A whole world of literature and film and music.
And online content.
Totally. Like a
Yeah.
hidden library.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of pronunciation.
Right.
The article mentioned that consonants have both a hard and a soft pronunciation.
Right. And it's not just an accent. It actually changes the meaning.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's kind of like how S in English sometimes sounds like Z, like the difference between sip and zip.
Oh, okay, I get it.
That one tiny sound makes a whole new word.
So it's not just learning the alphabet, it's mastering these tiny nuances in pronunciation.
Exactly. And this article also talks about voiced and voiceless consonants.
Okay.
Like they use the examples of sad for garden and then sat for well sat.
Wow.
Yeah, it's another small change that totally changes the meaning.
That's crazy. It makes you appreciate how much we just take for granted in our native language.
Yeah, we learn those subtle sounds as kids without even realizing it.
Right.
But then you try to learn a new language and you realize how complicated it all is.
Yeah, and then there are the vowels, right? Russian only has 6 basic vowel sounds.
True. But the catch is that they sound different depending on where they are in the word
Oh.
and the stress you put on them.
The article made a big deal about how important stress is in Russian pronunciation.
Yeah.
Like changing the emphasis can totally change the word.
Like content versus content.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not just about the vowels themselves, but how they're used within a word. That's why it's so tough for English speakers.
Yeah.
Because we have way more vowels.
Right.
And our stress patterns are different.
Okay, I have a confession to make.
What's up?
This whole case system thing is kind of freaking me out.
Huh.
Nouns changing form depending on their role in the sentence.
I know it can seem a little overwhelming.
It sounds like a whole new level of grammar.
It definitely takes some practice.
Right now, it feels like solving a Rubik's Cube blindfolded.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But one thing that's interesting is that Russian has a more flexible word order.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Unlike English, where word order is pretty strict.
Mm.
Russian gives you more freedom with how you arrange words.
So even though you have to learn all those crazy noun endings, you can play around with the word order.
Exactly. You can emphasize different parts of the sentence.
That's kind of cool.
It's one of the things that makes Russian so expressive. You can really highlight certain ideas and create different nuances.
Okay, so tell me more about this case system.
All right, let's dive in.
Okay.
So the case system is basically a way of marking the function of a noun.
Okay.
Like, for example, let's take the word book. In English, we can say I have a book, or I read the book, or even I gave the book to my friend.
Yeah, and the word book stays the same.
Exactly. We rely on word order to show how book relates to the other words.
Right.
But in Russian, the word book would change its ending depending on its role.
Oh, wow.
So if you're saying I have a book, it would have one form. If you say I read the book, it would have a totally different form.
So the ending of the noun basically tells you if it's the subject, the object, or something else.
Precisely. That's the core of the case system.
Okay, I see.
It marks the grammatical function of the noun by changing the ending.
It's actually pretty cool, but I can see how it would take some getting used to.
Oh, it definitely takes practice,
Yeah.
but it also adds a lot of precision and expressiveness.
And I guess that makes sense since Russian already puts so much emphasis on all those subtle differences in pronunciation and meaning.
Yeah, it's all about conveying those little distinctions.
And speaking of variations, we've been talking about this standardized version of Russian, but the article mentioned that there are all these regional dialects too.
That's right.
That makes me wonder, like, how are those dialects being preserved? Are they maybe even evolving in modern Russia?
That's a great question. It makes you think about how language is constantly shaped by things like globalization
Totally.
and cultural exchange.
It's this ongoing dance between preserving tradition and embracing change.
I love that analogy, the dance between tradition and change.
And for language learners, it adds a whole other level of difficulty, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to learn not just one version of a language,
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
but multiple variations.
Right. With their own pronunciation and vocabulary and even grammar.
Exactly.
It's mind-boggling, but also super exciting.
It is.
It's like language is this living, breathing thing that's always in motion and always changing.
I totally agree. And that's what makes studying languages so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's a journey full of surprises and new discoveries. As we wrap up this deep dive into the world of the Russian language, what's the most interesting thing you've learned?
Honestly, for me, it's the realization that language is so much more than just words and grammar.
Yeah,
It's like a window into a culture
totally.
and a history.
And even global power dynamics.
Exactly.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway is that language is like a tapestry, woven from all these different threads:
I like that.
history, politics, culture, and even individual creativity.
It really speaks to the power of human expression
Yeah,
and how we connect with each other across time and space.
that makes me want to dive even deeper into those regional dialects.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like uncovering hidden linguistic gems
Oh,
with
yeah.
every new word and phrase.
It's like stepping outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, and embracing all the richness of human communication.
I'm curious, for anyone listening who might be inspired to learn Russian, what advice would you give them?
Embrace the journey. It's definitely complex, but it's also super rewarding.
Imagine reading Dostoevsky in the original Russian or having a conversation with a native speaker.
That would be amazing.
There's nothing like it.
And think of all the people you'd meet
Oh, yeah.
and the cultural experiences you'd have.
Yeah, it's about so much more than memorizing vocabulary.
So true.
And grammar.
It's about broadening your horizons.
Yeah.
And challenging yourself.
Go on.
And connecting with a totally different way of seeing the world.
Well said. It sounds like learning Russian is an adventure.
It is.
Well, on that note, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the Russian language.
Sad to see it go.
We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have.
And we hope you'll keep exploring all the amazing languages out there.
There's always something new to discover.
Maybe your next deep dive will be into a language you never even considered before.
Until next time, happy diving.
Bye, everyone.